Hello and welcome to another e-CENS video. In this episode, I'm going to talk about switching from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4 and why this switch will require time and resources and therefore is absolutely not trivial. Hi, my name is Holger Tempel and I'm a partner at e-CENS as well as the founder and CEO of e-CENS Germany. I'm in the web analytics industry since 2002 and you can find me on LinkedIn and Xing. You might have already read the announcement by Russell Ketchum, who is the Director of Product Management for Google Analytics on the Google blog, or you've noticed the info above your existing Google Analytics view, which both states more or less the same. The first and most important statement is that Google Analytics Universal Analytics will stop processing incoming data hits from 1st of July 2023. This means that from this date on, your existing properties under Universal Analytics are useless since your existing reports in GA or any connected reporting apps such as Google Data Studio will not be populated anymore with data. And the second most extremely underestimated key takeaway is that you have to have successfully accomplished the switch to GA4 to make sure that the data you are collecting is valid, accurate, reliable, and actionable. Otherwise, the same would apply here. The reports would simply be useless. You might now think, hey, so what? Google Analytics offers some kind of assistant to migrate my Universal Analytics to GA4. If you go for this approach, you will most likely end up in a mess. This is because the vast majority of Universal Analytics implementations are tailored to the customer's needs and therefore need to be adjusted for GA4 as well. And this is something the assistant will not be able to take care of. So the key takeaway for you is don't go for the assistant. You will most likely need to set up and follow a migration plan, but more on that in another video. So let's have a quick overview on both versions. Universal Analytics is currently the best known, most powerful, most mature, and most widely used web analytics solution on the market with an exclusive focus on web analytics. GA4, on the other hand, is an analytics solution for websites and apps, which is also very powerful. GA4 is also able to unify the data collections of websites and apps. GA4 is officially available since 2019 and is set to become the successor of Universal Analytics. And believe me, it is not that easy to follow in Universal Analytics' footsteps. But of course, Google Analytics wants as many website owners as possible to switch from Universal Analytics to GA4. And since Google has been very promotional about GA4, many customers have turned to us and asked if they should switch from Universal Analytics to GA4. Even though the answer to this question was not so simple in the past, now it is mandatory to plan the switch accordingly. So what I'll try to accomplish in my videos is to give you little hints by revealing some of the key differences between Universal Analytics and GA4. Then these insights should help you make the right decision for your business, and in addition, I will try not to be too technical and instead keep the explanations on a level which will be easy to understand. In order to understand what the differences between Universal Analytics and GA4 are and why they were necessary at all, we need to take a closer look at the evolution of Google Analytics. So let's take a trip down memory lane and start where it all began. And that was when in 1995 the company Quantified Systems was founded in San Diego, California. The company's purpose at that time was to perform web analytics. And this was done with their own developed software called e-CENS. In 1999, Quantified Systems released the software e-CENS version 2, which exclusively dealt with the analysis of server log files. At that time, the following applied. Web pages only had two kinds of actions. You could either view a page, which was a page view, or you could click on a link. Also, the identity was super simple since an IP address was meant to be a visitor. And last but not least, there were only two browsers available. So browser was either Internet Explorer by Microsoft or Netscape Navigator. And storing this data was the foundation for the data model that is still used in Universal Analytics today. Due to the success of the software e-CENS, Quantified Systems was renamed to e-CENS Software Corporation in 2001. Only 1 year later, Urchin version 4 was released and introduced cookie-based data collection for the first time, the so-called Urchin tracking module. This made Urchin version 4 the world's most accurate system for measuring unique visitors, sessions, and page views, and also offered many reports. Yet another year later, in 2003, Urchin version 5 was released, offering graphically enhanced reports, a variety of additional reports, and copy-paste integration of those reports into Office applications. Also, Urchin version 5 was sold as a base module and introduced campaign tracking module, e-commerce module, as well as other modules. And along with the release of Urchin version 5, the UTM parameters were introduced, which enabled the precise evaluation of online campaigns. And then in 2004, the guys at Urchin Software Corporation decided to release Urchin 6 on demand, which was a hosted service. Today it would be called a cloud solution, but at that time nobody knew this term. And this hosted service was sold at the price of $495 per month, including 100,000 page views, which was quite a lot these days. In March 2005, Google acquired Urchin Software Corporation, and in November 2005, Urchin On Demand was rebranded to Google Analytics and made available for everyone free of charge. In 2007, Steve Jobs of Apple announced the iPhone, and although no association with Google Analytics could have been made at that time, it was still to be a milestone in the history of smartphone evolution and thus indirectly had a significant impact on the evolution of Google Analytics, but more on that in a moment. In 2009, Google introduced advanced tagging for Google Analytics and increased the efficiency of loading data into the Urchin data model. Furthermore, Google was also busy integrating Google Analytics into its ecosystem, so to say Google Display Network, Google AdWords, Google AdSense, and Google Search Console. In February 2012, Urchin software was officially set end of life by Google. But fragments of Google are still in daily use. Many people assume that the UA and the tracking ID is short for Universal Analytics, but in fact it stands for Urchin Account. Likewise, the UTM parameters that were introduced with Urchin version 5 back in 2003 continued to be used. Remember, UTM stands for Urchin Tracking Module. Meanwhile, in 2012, smartphone sales were skyrocketing and therefore the rising number of apps and the need to measure their usage was exploding the possibilities of data collection. And this made Google release Google Analytics Universal Analytics in 2013, introducing groundbreaking innovations including User ID for collecting data from users across devices, Mobile SDK for data collection in mobile apps, custom dimensions and custom metrics for additional storage of data that is not already collected by Google Analytics, and last but not least, the measurement protocol to transfer data to Google Analytics that is not collected via websites or apps. Google realized quite quickly that the introduction of Universal Analytics was not enough. The data model used from 1999 was simply no longer able to meet the constantly increasing requirements for data collection and data storage. This insight led Google to introduce Firebase Analytics in 2016 as the successor to App Tracking with Mobile SDK, which was both exciting and highly disappointing at the same time. On one hand, this was because the data model was modern and much more like an event-based data model than in Universal Analytics. On the other hand, the available reports in Google Analytics for an app property, which also offered data export directly via the API, were suddenly replaced by a beta-like interface on a completely different platform which came up with a completely different look and feel. And this left the product at that time bifurcated, causing a lot of confusion because the user was left in the strange state depending on what do you want to measure. If the intention was to measure web, then Google Analytics should be used. But when it came to measuring apps, there was another decision to be made depending on what's your role? Because this could be accomplished either by using Firebase Analytics, which was really a developer-centric product, or it could have been done by using Google Analytics through the Universal Analytics product in conjunction with a mobile SDK, which was built for marketers. This created a lot of unhealthy confusion in the market in terms of which product was meant for which user. And then by 2018, things had developed to the point where Google really couldn't support the mobile devices anymore with the 1999 data model. Therefore, Google started to wind down the mobile SDK part of Universal Analytics and announced that this was no longer going to be a supported feature. However, the biggest problem at that time was that Google completely disabled the possibility of collecting usage data in apps using the mobile SDK in October 2019. And they also permanently deleted the corresponding properties, including the data from February 2020. From this moment on, it was very clear. If the intention was to measure apps, Firebase Analytics should be used, and if web was to be measured, Google Analytics was the product of choice. But unfortunately, there were basically two different product footprints that the user had to interact with, depending on what the measuring goals were. That was why Google set out to create a unified look and feel for apps and web by merging Firebase Analytics and Google Analytics. At the end of July 2019, Google started the journey of creating a unified experience for both apps and webs by merging Firebase Analytics and Google Analytics. And the outcome was the introduction of app and web properties in Google Analytics. If there was a need to measure both, now there was a native Google Analytics product which brought Firebase Analytics back under the Google Analytics hood and, as a native GA product, was capable of measuring across both using the modern data model. And Google's goal was trying to create parity between the app and web-only parts of Google Analytics. Web-only was the product that most of the users were familiar with. It is based on an essentially 21-year-old data model about page views. App and web was based on a modern data model, which in turn is based on events. Speaking in terms of identity, web-only is essentially a web-based identity, whereas app and web has this idea of cross-platform identity. This means that a user who moves from the web to mobile and back again can be tracked across both of those platforms. A very important point is that sessions for web-only are still calculated server-side. This is a very expensive process where the calculation is done over the user logs, which means that there is no accurate session count available until the end of the day. App and web, on the other hand, is a client-side sensitization, which makes it a much more scalable product and delivers a lot more features to the users at higher volumes than it could have been done with the web-only product. The more challenging part for app and web property is that people aren't familiar with it. The web-only product has millions of happy users. Regarding app and web, people are on a learning curve to understanding what it is and what it can do. App and web also didn't have the ads integration that web-only had. Same with the numbers of pre-built reports. The web-only product has a massive reporting database, whereas app and web had only a handful. The API landscape for web-only is very well developed. It's got the reporting API, the management API, and the measurement protocol. App and web did not have any API functionality available. And from an enterprise perspective, the web-only product has some important enterprise constructs, like the idea to create views that segment data based on different people within the company and their ability to access certain kinds of data. And then there's this concept of roll-up properties, where you can aggregate different properties reporting into a central hub. App and web didn't have that. And in October 2020, the app and web property became the new standard and was renamed to Google Analytics 4. The important question now is, how is the switch from Universal Analytics to GA4 to be made? To answer this, we need to go deeper into the pros and cons of GA4, which we will do in the next video.